Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. This is Daniela and today I'm gonna talk about the books that made me who I am. I don't mean my favorite books or the best books I've ever read. I mean the books that had a really big impact on me growing up and throughout my life. I don't feel comfortable calling them my favorite books because I have a really bad habit of not rereading books ever. I used to not even rewatch films that I have watched before, but realize that that's just silly and that you can get a lot from rewatching something that you loved. You can learn new things, you can see if you still like it, sometimes you like it even more, so there's really no excuse to not do it. And I will like to do a video with my favorite books of all time, but I will need to reread some of them to be sure that they are actually my favorites. So, what was the first book that really impacted me? The Little Prince. This is my first edition. I have in other languages. I'm trying to collect one from every single country that I visit and has a translation. And this is the first one that I got. It's very yellowed and it's very precious to me. This is the first book that I remember reading. I love the drawings, I love the message. Who can forget about the hat that is a snake that actually swallowed an elephant? And it has so many good passages and so many good moments. I have a tattoo of the rose. So yeah, it's very important to me. It's really fond memory of my childhood. I couldn't start the list with anything else but this. Now I want to talk about some books from my pre-adolescence years. And two very big ones were Lua de Joana and Ghost Girl. These books were important to me because they showed me that you could talk about very heavy, dense topics in a way that children or adolescents could relate to it and could understand. So Ghost Girl is about a teenage girl that goes to high school, and one day she's eating a gummy bear and she chokes and dies. And the book takes place after she dies, when she's a ghost, and she meets a lot of other ghost teens that died in terrible, embarrassing ways. And I just loved the weirdness. I just felt really connected to it. I loved like dark stuff at the time. I was obsessed with like the Tim Burton aesthetic, and so this was a really big deal to me. I really felt seen at that age. This book, I'm not sure if it was translated. It says here that I bought it with my own money. It's a book that spoke in a very not obvious way about drug abuse and depression in teenagers. So it was a book that was super recommended for people when I was, I don't know, around 11, 12, 13, because it's not overt, so they don't show the abuse, but they show it in like a metaphorical way. So Joanna, who is the main character, her room starts to become whiter and whiter, like she's losing her personality and she's changing a lot, and she has it's called Lua de Joana, which means Joanna's moon, and it's because she has like a half moon in her room. I don't know if I would agree to the approach of the topic now, but it was a big deal for me because it was an important topic. I was learning that you could use books to talk about those things. Afterwards comes something that I've already talked about on my first video, the big one from when I was a teenager. Of course, it's Twilight. I was obsessed with it. I loved it. I knew all the characters, the clans, and I think I was really in love with the concept of having a story with lore and a magic system of sorts, and there were rules to the universe and you could learn those rules. I also felt very lonely in school. I felt very misunderstood, and so a protagonist like Bella was really enticing to me. Like she was the person I hoped that I was more special than my life made me seem to be. And now I know it's a little bit silly to think about that, but at the time it was really important for me to have some sort of escapism and to just think that there was something waiting for me, that something magical could happen to me at any time. And I know it was super toxic. The relationships are not great, they're not role models at all. But I don't think they messed me up. I think I just had a really good time and that I was very entertained for some years because of this. Then I read something that I was probably a little too young to read it, and that was The House of the Spirits by Isabel Allende. I think in Portugal, since our language is so close to the Spanish, we have a better understanding of Latin American literature, and so people like Isabel Allende, Gabriel Garcia Marquez are really big here and were when I was growing up. And so my mom had this book and she just let me read it. I really enjoyed it. I remember I was saying at the time that it was my favorite book of all time. I don't know if it held up or not. So I have to reread it to discover. But this is like an intergenerational story taking place in Chile. There's magical realism, and I think that's what captivated me so much. That there's these small magical elements contrasted with really dark reality. Political events are happening while there's someone that can see the future or something in that range. And I think that's what fascinated me so much. And I've loved magical realism ever since I read this book. The other one from my teenage years that I remember very fondly is The Fault in Our Stars. And I know this book gets a little bit of a bad rap for being cheesy and being cringy and everything else, but I really enjoyed it at the time. I remember so vividly when the adaptation came out and I couldn't stop crying while watching the movie. And it wasn't even in the end when things were wrong, it was throughout it, because I was so devastated that they were happy but that wouldn't last. And I think experiencing those feelings through a safe, through something safe like a narrative in a book or in a movie was really important to me as a teenager. I loved the references, I loved the humor, and I think it helped develop me in my language, in my understanding of the English language even. Because it was from this time that I started reading mostly in English as well. So yeah, I think I can't say bad things about this book because it was so important to me at the time. So two books that were really important to me as well were The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde and Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I read them when I was in high school, and I remember them more vividly, I think, because I had to give a presentation on both of them. I gave a presentation on Pride and Prejudice for English class, and I put on this British accent, and I don't know why I did that. But it was a good presentation apparently, and I was participating in a contest. I talked about The Picture of Dorian Gray, and I think it was a time when my teachers were surprised that I read this. I think they thought it was a little too much for my age, and it probably was. I think a lot of it went completely over my head. So this is completely do a reread, but it made me interested in classics and really understanding something that was written in another language and not in a contemporary sense. So there were a lot of words that I hadn't heard before, and it was also the first time that I actually had to explain my thoughts in a more deeper sense, because I had presentations before, but I remember these two because I think I had to actually think about them and articulate my arguments. And I think that's why I'm here today. It is because of these books that led me to believe that I can speak about books in a slightly eloquent way. At least I hope that I'm getting better at doing that. So I'm very grateful to these books. And I made Pride and Prejudice my entire personality for a long time. I expected to meet my Mr. Darcy, and I was very really enthralled by all this romantic Regency era. So now all the Bridgerton obsession is very entertaining to me because it's making me relive that time. So now we have arrived at the Saramago Corner, and I'll try to keep this as short as possible, but Saramago is a very special author to me, and has ever since I read the Gospel According to Jesus Christ. I read this in high school, and we have to read a book by Saramago in class in Portuguese literature, and it was, I believe the title in English is Baltasar and Blimunda, in Portuguese is O Memorial de Convento. And I'm not sure, but I believe I read this before I read Memorial de Convento. It changed me completely. It completely changed me. Saramago has been sort of a part of my imaginary since a little girl. If you don't know, Saramago lived for many years in the island of Lanzarote, which is a Spanish island in the Canary Islands? I don't know. Ilhas Canárias. I used to go there when I was little to spend my holidays because I had family there. I remember my parents talking about Saramago moving there and living there, and I knew he was our Nobel Literature Prize, so he was a big deal. Yeah, I remember him from that time. Last year, or 2 years ago? No, last year, I believe. It was 100 years since his birth. He has sadly already passed away, so I never got a chance to meet him and to tell him how much his way of writing impacted me, because I learned that we could change the rules, we could write in a different way, we could talk about topics that are taboo and that society doesn't want us to talk about, and that we can make people thinking, and that we can bring something from understanding people. And I mean that in the way that he grew up in a very small town in Alentejo. I'm not from Alentejo, but I'm also from a very small town. And I think you bring something from that experience of growing up in a tight-knit community where everybody knows each other. And I struggle to explain it. Now it's something that really fascinates me. I can't explain how much I love his writing. I believe it was 2 years ago that it was 100 years since his birth, as I said. But what I wanted to talk about is that there was a contest to write a love letter to Saramago. And I did. I participated and I got 4th place. And I leave down below the link if you want to read it. It's in Portuguese. So if you understand Portuguese, or if you want to use Google Translator, I don't know, you can read it. I was just happy to participate, and when I got 4th place, I felt very honored and very lucky, and I got to go to the museum in Lisbon and meet Pilar del Rio, who was his wife, and she was so kind and so thoughtful. Really, it was a lovely day just to meet her, and she even gave me her book, and she signed it. She didn't give it just to me, but it's a big deal to me as well. At least it's a big deal. And she signed it, and I haven't read it yet, unfortunately. But this is a book about Saramago living in Lanzarote, which is also a very special place to me. And so I'm very excited to discover what is written here. And yeah, I just wanted to mention how much of an impact he has had on me, and the way I write and the way I think about literature and what can be written. Other book that I picked up randomly during my university years was Paula by Isabel Allende as well. Second appearance of Isabel Allende here. I grabbed this at a faculty literary fair or something for like €2. This is devastating. This is a devastating book. Paula was Isabel Allende's daughter, and she fell into a coma. It's just a very tragic event. Isabel Allende talks about the experience of seeing her daughter in such a tragic, fragile position and not being able to help. And throughout the book, she's also talking about her life story. And that's what captivated me so much, was learning about herself while there was this cloud of sadness throughout it. And there's these little hopes that it will get better, and then it doesn't. And it's just very heartbreaking. And it impacted me so much because I'm not sure if it was the first memoir I read, but at least it's the first one that I remember. And now I love memoirs. I love learning about people's lives through their words, how they explain how they felt, how they organize their thoughts, if they say it in a chronological order, if they're all jumbled up. I think it's so interesting when people want to share their story. Like I said, I believe in my first video, reading is an exercise in empathy, and there's nothing more empathetic than experiencing someone else's life through their words and see where they come from. So yeah, I'm very grateful to this book, even though it's very sad. If you like The Year of Magical Thinking, I believe you might like this book as well. The final book I have to mention from my university years is The Trial by Franz Kafka. I did my master thesis in Oslo, in Norway, and I loved living there. I loved Oslo, and I really want to go back there. I was so happy living there, but unfortunately my thesis was not going so well. The city was beautiful, I had great friends there, I found some places with great food even though it was super expensive. And while I was doing my master thesis, I was reading this book. And it gave me great comfort. And I think at the time I didn't really connect the dots, but I feel like I was experiencing, not to the degree of The Trial, but I was experiencing something a little similar. If you don't know, The Trial is about this man called Joseph K. He is just put on trial for something, and he doesn't know what he's on trial for. The book is him trying to figure out what was the crime that he committed, and he just keeps going from place to place to place. It's just bureaucracy, bureaucracy, more bureaucracy. At the time I was writing the thesis, and I had this tutor that just didn't tutor me at all. Like, he didn't respond to my emails, he basically never showed up, he didn't answer to my questions. And when I sent my writing to him to review, he didn't review it. And so I was in this hell of not knowing what to do, of not getting any answers. And now looking back, I think this was the perfect choice to read at the time. It was comforting to feel connected to this character that had no idea what was going on, but it just had deadlines and places to be in, papers to deliver, and I was doing the same thing. Now we're entering my adult working life. The Way of King by Brandon Sanderson. I have to give the award to this book as the book that brought me into the craziness that you're seeing in my videos. Because I was reading, as I have shown throughout this video, all my life. But I wasn't reading as much as I wanted, as much as I would like to. And I think this book is what pulled me back in completely. And it was when I was living in a place where I was very miserable because I was renting a room in an apartment that belonged to the grandma of my roommates, of my housemate, I might say. And she was a nightmare. She was a nightmare to me, and I just stayed in my room basically all day trying to avoid her. Her cat loved me and he was always trying to get in my room, so he was also a great comfort. I miss that cat all the time. And this book as well. And I think, besides, I believe, being a great book of fantasy with a very interesting lore, very captivating characters, written very well as well, oh my god. I believe the most important part is the number of pages. And this might sound a little crazy, but I think I wouldn't have loved it as much if it wasn't as big as it is, because this amount of pages warrants time. You need to give your time to this book, you need to spend time with these characters, and I think that's why I feel like I know them so well, why I feel like I remember this so vividly even though I read it 4 years ago. Like, these characters stayed with me, and I think it was the size, I think it was the number of pages that I spent with them. And so I'm very, very thankful, because I was so happy reading this. I felt so happy when I finished it. And I think my reading just increased so much. I read this like at the end of 2020, around that time. And then in 2021, I read over 100 books. So I think this really started something and really ignited a spark. And I just kept reading because I loved that feeling again. I wanted to keep on feeling that excitement. And so I'm very, very grateful. Now, these two books are The Last Duel and Chernobyl, History of a Tragedy. And I think these are books that are really important to me because they're obviously non-fiction books. And they show me non-fiction in a different light. I think there's a big divide for some reason in reading, and I think it's connected obviously to gender roles and gender expectations. Most readers of non-fiction, I would say, are men, and women usually read more romance and literary fiction, I would say. There's a lot of men that don't read fiction for some reason. It had a bad rap for me. It felt inaccessible, it felt like it didn't belong to me. But these books convinced me that I can read whatever I want. And there's no category, there's no gender for reading. Every book is for everyone. If they want to read it, it's there. And we need to end this separation. And please, people that say they don't read fiction, what are you doing? People that don't read non-fiction at all, also stop it. Do it. Try it at least once. Branch out. I think it's my message. Branch out. And these books are really, really good. They're really compelling. The Last Duel is about literally the last duel that happened in France to finish a trial. And obviously Chernobyl is about the disaster in 1986. And they're so thorough, so well researched. And they're so entertaining and easy to read, really. They explain the events and the facts in a very compelling way. And that's when I fell in love with non-fiction, besides memoirs that I was already more familiar with. And so now I really want to read more non-fiction. I want to learn more from authors, from people that have researched these topics, that have traveled to the places and do the things that we can't all do. Reach this level of understanding, you have to focus and narrow down on a single topic for a long time. and then we can just read, I don't know, like 300 pages and learn all that research that someone spent years and years doing. And I think that's really special and really magical. Now, a special mention to two books that I believe would feature on my favorites of all time as well. But I have to reread them to be sure. And they're my brilliant friend, but also the entire Neapolitan Quartet and Normal People by Sally Rooney. These books are amazing. I love them. Besides the writing that I really connect with, I think I wanted to mention them specifically in this video because when I was a teenager, I read books like The Hunger Games that were really impactful to me as well, and they should be on this list, but unfortunately I don't have a copy of The Hunger Games, and so I keep forgetting to mention it. Those books had aspirational protagonists, so people that I wanted to be like. Katniss is so brave, she's so fearless, she just tackles challenges in a way that is aspirational to me. These books have protagonists that I connected with on things that I'm not proud of. So they have struggles, they have flaws that I also have. And that was really important to me because I think sometimes people don't like to read books from the perspective of very flawed characters, from people that do things that they don't agree with. And sometimes it's because we see a reflection of ourselves, or sometimes it's just because we don't like those types of people. And that's fine, but I think it's so interesting to read about it. It makes you think people are not perfect, they have flaws, and I think literature should explore that, should explore those bad things, even if it's the protagonist of your story. I connected a lot with them. They fought things that have been on my mind and that I wasn't proud of. And that made me connect to the text so much. And it doesn't mean that I feel validated or that I want to have those feelings again, but it's a sense of this is a human experience. People think things that they don't want to think. These books were really important to me because they showed me that yes, we can explore everything about the human experience in a book. You don't have to write perfect protagonists because they're boring. They're mostly very boring. And so these are very interesting characters that I really enjoy. And finally, because I can't make a video without mentioning Emily Dickinson, the list wouldn't be right without her. I watched the show Dickinson a couple of years ago. It's an Apple TV show about the life of Emily Dickinson, and obviously her poetry is a big part of it. And it just made me feel amazing. It made me feel so inspired by her writing. Obviously, I had read poems before that I had liked a lot. When I was a teenager, I also really connected with Fernando Pessoa's writing, but there was something about Emily Dickinson's way of writing poetry that just touched me so much, that spoke to me in a way that no one else had before. And she's a very special poet, author, person to me because of that. I started writing poetry because of it, and it was a way of expressing myself that I hadn't really explored. And that made me just really happy, even if my poetry is just very derivative of hers. But I had a good time doing it, and so I'm always going to be grateful. Her poems were really, really impactful to me, and I'm sure will continue throughout my lifetime. So yeah, these are the books that made me who I am today in very different ways. I would love to know what are the books that made you who you are, not just your favorite books, but the books that had an impact on you that you just didn't expect at all, that were just the right book at the right time. If you like this video, give it a like if you want to, leave a comment, I would really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, you can also subscribe to my channel so you can watch the other video. And I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you soon. Bye!